Can you dream of a world immune to cancer? Hello everyone, my name is Nick and I'm the host of the annual live stream for The Cure, where content creators and podcasters from around the world join me to raise money for the Cancer Research Institute and immunotherapy research, which is training the body's immune system to fight against all forms of cancer. Over the past 7 years, thanks to the power of indie podcasters and the indie podcasting community and listeners just like you listening to this right now, we have raised over $90,000. And as I record this now, the 8th annual live stream for The Cure is barreling down upon us really quickly in just about 2 weeks. So join us please from May 29th through June 1st for 48 hours of amazing content from people all over the world and help us fight for a world immune to cancer. I'll now return you to your regularly scheduled programming. Thank you so much. And together, we can make a difference.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma. Welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 256, The Italian Job 1969 and The Italian Job 2003. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. And as always, hello, welcome to Verbal Diorama. Whether you are a brand new listener to this podcast, whether you are a regular returning listener, or whether you're just a member of the Self-Preservation Society, thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast. I am, as always, so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of The Italian Job 1969 and The Italian Job 2003. And why am I doing 2 movies on this episode? Well, let me tell you, because this month is remake. Because it's May and remakes. And you get the picture. I shouldn't need to explain a pun. It's a bad pun, but it's also a great pun. Just appreciate my love of puns. And I've wanted to do a month of looking at the original movie and looking at the remake for some time. Before I go into all of that, as always, huge love and thanks to everyone who listens to this podcast and has continued to listen to and support me and this podcast over the last 5 years of doing this podcast. I am still absolutely floored that I've been doing this for over 5 years now. And I'm always so touched just by how nice people are. And how much wonderful support you get from literal strangers who are just listening to a podcast. It's lovely. It's great to see there are some really nice humans in the world. Recently on this podcast, I've done episodes on Clash of the Titans and Clash of the Titans and Dawn of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Or how to stay alive during 2 zombie apocalypses. Basically, what we established from the last episode on Dawn of the Dead was don't be cocky or be a dog. It's all about self-preservation as society crumbles, right? Hey, here we go. Here's a good link. Here we go. Speaking of self-preservation societies, fasten your seatbelts. We're going on a journey. Here's the trailer for The Italian Job, 1969.
Bloody foreigners.
Poi a prendere a sinistra.
What is the Italian job?
a seating chaos, a smash and grab raid, and $4 million.
$4 million? I think we could take that over, Roger. Go! You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Good evening, Mr. Bridger. Croker, I've got a job lined up. Get out of here. It's all here. Maps, drawings, plans, everything. You've been put up to this, haven't you? You've been bribed to upset my natural rhythm and ruin my health.
Michael Caine does the Italian job on the outside.
Now, go on, go round, get in front of me.
And masterminding the job from the inside, Noel Coward. Two gentlemen on the job.
Does Mr. Bridger think he can take over Europe from a prison cell? Wait till you see them Italian birds.
Oh, they're big. I like them big.
No.
Really? Big.
Also on the Italian job, Ralph Vallone, Tony Beckley, Maggie Bly, Rossano Brazzi.
I want Charlie Croker given a good going over.
Hello, Charlie. Lovely, Charlie. Nice, Charlie. Good to see you, Charlie. Now, what would you like?
Everything.
Hey! Knock that bloody water cannon out! Hurry up, Dominic! Now!
This is a foreign job to help with this country's balance of payments.
Having just left Her Majesty's pleasure, Charlie Croker is persuaded to do another job. This time a job in Italy, which one of his friends attempted but was stopped by the mafia. Charlie agrees to take over the job and builds a team. The plan is simple. Use the Football World Cup in Turin as cover to steal $4 million in gold bullion. Hack the computerised traffic system to bring the roads to a standstill and use Mini Coopers to escape into the Swiss mountains. Let's run through the cast. We have Michael Caine as Charlie Croker, Noel Coward as Mr. Bridger, Benny Hill as Professor Peach, Ralph Vallone as Altabani, Tony Beckley as Camp Freddy, Rossano Brazzi as Roger Beckerman, and Maggie Bly as Lorna. The Italian Job 1969 was written by Troy Kennedy Martin and directed by Peter Collinson. Let's talk about traffic lights. It's relevant, I promise. Their operation is something that we all take for granted. Traffic lights just work till they don't. We've all experienced broken down lights and the absolute carnage it causes when traffic doesn't know what to do. It was Oxford Street's hectic traffic light system that inspired Ian Kennedy Martin to conceive an idea about a robbery set in London that used a traffic jam to help complete the heist. His brother was 60s TV writer Troy Kennedy Martin, who'd made a name for himself at the BBC, creating the long-running police series Z-Cars, a revolutionary TV show where the police were seen as fallible in a warts-and-all portrayal of British policing that annoyed many within the police force, but that drew 14 million viewers in its heyday. With Ian's permission, Troy purchased the idea from his brother and built on it. The heist would involve traffic, but not in London. The city would be Turin, Italy, which had a new state-of-the-art computer-controlled traffic centre and served as the headquarters for Fiat, and this city was built on the automotive industry. The cars would not be Fiats, more on that in a bit, but classic BMC/British Leyland Minis, more on that in a little bit too. Troy Kennedy Martin was a regular visitor to Italy. His sister lived in Rome and he visited Turin and pictured the squares and streets being the ideal showcase for the nimble, tiny British Mini. He wrote a script with the Mini as his choice of getaway car, a compact, economical and affordable car designed by Sir Alec Isigonis, launched in 1959 and voted the second most influential car of the 20th century in 1999, the first being the Ford Model T. Following fuel rationing after the 1956 Suez Crisis, sales of large cars slumped, and Isigonis was tasked with bringing a small car into production. The code name was XC9003, which became Project ADO15 and launched by BMC as the Morris Mini Minor and the Austin 7, which soon became known as the Austin Mini. It had a revolutionary engine arrangement, a conventional pre-existing BMC A-Series 4-cylinder water-cooled engine mounted transversely with the 4-speed transmission in the sump and front-wheel drive. The Mini was so space-efficient that it left room enough to comfortably seat 4 adults, even if luggage was limited, and those 4 adults were only a foot off the ground. Anyway, I am going to come back to the Minis and the rest of the vehicles later. Michael Caine heard of the script while he was stranded at LAX airport, and Charlie Blue Dawn, the then owner of Paramount Studios, had literally just bought Paramount in 1966 and had made the movie Alfie with Michael Caine. Blue Dawn would introduce himself to Caine as the man who's just bought Paramount and asked Caine if there were any films he wanted to make. Caine would mention this script he'd heard of called The Italian Job. With Paramount on board to distribute the film, it was the production company Oakhurst, ran by Michael Dealey and Stanley Baker, who then joined the production. Baker, who previously produced Zulu, also starring Michael Caine, was suggested to direct The Italian Job, but he wasn't interested, and so Paramount went off to find a suitable director, with Peter Yates in the lineup after the success of Bullitt. Charlie Blue Dawn, though, wanted Peter Collinson, who'd also previously worked with Michael Dealey on low-budget war film The Long Day's Dying. Collinson would also bring star quality to the movie. As a child, he attended the Actors' Orphanage in Surrey, and the president of the orphanage at the time was Noel Coward. Coward became Collinson's godfather and helped him start his film career, working small jobs at the BBC before becoming a TV director in 1964. Coward and Collinson would remain close, and towards the end of the 1960s, Coward was diagnosed with arteriosclerosis. When Collinson got the job directing The Italian Job, Coward, despite his failing health at the time, joined the cast as Mr. Bridger. It would be his last credited performance. While Troy Kennedy Martin's original script was more serious and hard-edged, the finished result would be more comedic and light-hearted, with Michael Caine often improvising scenes, such as the scene where he picks up his Aston Martin from the garage. When pre-production began in Turin, Fiat were particularly welcoming to the production and offered their own locations for shooting, multiple vehicles for the shoot, as well as a cash bonus for switching the Minis featured in the movie for Fiat 500s. This offer was respectfully declined. The Italian Job was a British movie and needed to retain its trio of British stars. That didn't mean BMC were as generous, though. While Fiat was offering vehicles and locations to the production for free, to show off Turin, the British Motor Corporation wouldn't offer the production any free vehicles, but they did offer 6 brand new Mark I Minis, 2 of each colour, at cost price. The production had to buy a further 30 vehicles at regular retail prices, most of which were second-hand, and a mix of standard 848cc and Coupe S models. The cars were fitted with future-dated number plates to show a 1969 registration, and any 848cc cars were modified to match the Coupe S models, with everything stripped out of the vehicles, so only basics in the vehicles, plus roll bars in all. Only 6 of these 848cc replica cars survived the shoot. The rest were either destroyed or considered unroadworthy. Of the 6 remaining replicas, they were abandoned in a storage unit in Turin, but never recovered. The Aston Martin DB4, the E-Type Jaguar, and the Lamborghini Miura were all purchased new, with the DB4 sold to a private collector, the 2 E-Types being restored to original condition and sold, and the Miura that went down the side of the mountain having previously been in a serious accident and not roadworthy. The original Miura, driven in the opening by Roger Beckerman, was sold afterwards. The DB4 pushed off the cliff wasn't actually a DB4, but a Vignale Lancia Flaminia, mocked up to look like the Aston Martin, after the special effects on the original car accidentally went off at the wrong time, and it blew up before it went down the cliff. Despite the big names in the cast and the big vehicle costs of this movie, the entire budget was only $3 million, which is roughly $42 million today. Filming took place on location in Turin, including driving sequences on the roof of the Palavella and inside the Palazzo Esposizione. For these scenes, they needed the best stunt driver in the business, so they called Remy Julien. Former French motocross champion in 1957, Julien had worked with stunt coordinator Gilles Delamere, and after his tragic death during a stunt in 1966, Julien stepped in to fulfill contracts that Delamere had signed prior to his sudden death. Julien used science to approach his stunts, meaning he could plan and prepare some of the most elaborate stunts in the business. His reputation led to the producers of the Italian Job contacting him to develop stunts for the Minis, as well as provide a highly skilled and experienced team of drivers and mechanics. Safety and precision were the top priorities, and it was a good job someone knew how to drive, because at the time, Michael Caine didn't. Any shot of him with a car is either getting in, getting out, or as a passenger. David Salamone, who'd already been hired as a stunt coordinator, as well as tasked with supplying the vehicles, would end up becoming one of the lead drivers along with Barry Cox and Richard Assame, having been essentially demoted by Julien's appointment. Julien would become Hollywood's go-to vehicle stunt coordinator, probably best known for his stunts on 6 James Bond films, 5 of which were directed by legendary James Bond director John Glenn. And so to do these elaborate stunts, they would close down the whole centre of Turin for filming. And this was thanks to the head of Fiat, Gianni Agnelli, because Agnelli had so much sway in the city that even the police let the roads close down on his approval. Not everything was shot in Turin, though. The famous "You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off" scene was filmed at the Crystal Palace Sports Centre in South London. The exterior of the prison is HM Prison Wormwood Scrubs in West London, with the funeral and prison interiors shot in and around Dublin. And this was at the request of Noel Coward, something to do with tax breaks for filming in Dublin. The sewer scenes, well, they were actually shot fairly locally to this podcast in Stoke Aldermore in Coventry. There's even a little plaque there. The Minis had to be lowered into the sewer pipes by crane, and Remy Julien would attempt a 360 roll on film, but it was too slippy. There are rumours that he succeeded during test runs, though. The cars were filmed by a camera on a Mini Moke. There were also plans to shoot the Minis driving down the steps of Coventry Cathedral, which was famously bombed during World War II, but this never materialised. And in an era before digital effects, the Italian Job simply wows on these incredible driving stunts, all of which are real, including the jump between 2 roofs in Turin. Remy Julien did all the calculations, the speed of the cars had to be exact, the angle of the ramps exact. If anyone got injured on set, the filmmakers were liable, which basically meant producer Michael Dealey. And he was nervous. Anything could go wrong, and if it did, he would have ended up in an Italian jail. As a precaution, Fiat provided a car, and a plane was waiting at Turin Airport to immediately take Dealey back to the UK. The original plan was for each car to take the jump individually. It was Julien who suggested all 3 concurrently. More of a spectacle that way, and if they could do it once, they could do it once with 3 vehicles. It was one take or nothing. They chose one take. Julien's calculations were correct, and all 3 cars sailed over the gap and landed safely. No one was injured, and Michael Dealey never did need to flee back to Britain to explain himself. That didn't mean no injuries occurred on set, though. A sequence in which a Rolls-Royce slides around a gravel circle was shot, but never included in the film. And that's because during the sequence, the car lost control in the spin and hit David Wynne-Jones, a clapper boy, on the first take. It was first thought that Wynne-Jones had just broken both legs, but it later became clear that the situation was far more serious. He eventually underwent more than a dozen internal operations, and his recovery took more than a year. While he was in the hospital, a number of the crew paid him visits, including the director Peter Collinson and Michael Caine. Remy Julien was given complete control over all car stunt work after this accident, which did not involve any of his drivers, to make sure an incident like this never happened again. David Wynne-Jones would thankfully go on to make a full recovery. The ending of this movie also teetered on the balance throughout filming because no one could agree how it should end. There were 4 endings written, but Dealey wasn't satisfied with all of them, including one where the mafia would arrive in helicopters to save the bus. The literal cliffhanger was seen as the ideal setup for a sequel. But there's also another possible reason why it ended the way that it did. The Hays Code of 1934 stated in its general principles that, quote, "No picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Hence, the sympathy of the audience should never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin," unquote. Despite the code being abandoned in 1968 after years of it being seen as a joke and irrelevant to then modern filmmaking, there is a small possibility it did influence the ending of The Italian Job, with it having an open-ended cliffhanger ending, meaning that Croker and his gang don't actually get the gold at the end. But it's always open to interpretation. Kane himself has openly discussed in interviews his version of the ending, where the gang run the engine dry, emptying the fuel tank and allowing the bus to roll back onto the cliff edge where the gang would escape, and then the bus would fall down the cliff to the waiting mafia. A sequel would then have Croker and his team getting the gold back from the mafia. That sequel would never materialise, though. There have been, however, a number of competitions to find a scientific solution to the ending. They couldn't take more than 30 minutes and no helicopters were allowed. It was John Godwin from Surrey who won the Royal Society of Chemistry's competition by breaking the 2 large side windows just past the pivot point, letting the glass fall out, and then breaking 2 windows over the front axles, keeping that glass inside for weight distribution. Using the 2 front broken windows, a man could then dangle out, deflate the front tyres, and drain the fuel tank to change the balance enough to let a man out of the bus to gather rocks to load the front of the bus, unload the gold, and wait for a passing vehicle to hijack. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. The final scene was of the Bedford Val Harrington bus left dangling over a cliff at Cerasoli in the Alps, but the in-coach scenes were filmed back at Twickenham Studios. And that bus, there was only ever one of them for the whole shoot, meaning they had to take care of it. It was specially converted for the film, and it survived filming and was still in operation up to the 1990s. The scene where the Minis were driven into the back of the bus was also real and filmed on a closed stretch of road. In 1998, a Channel 4 documentary about the movie discovered a missing scene that had been removed. The scene shows the police pursuing the Mini Coopers onto an ice rink, where the cars then break into a bizarre waltz to Blue Danube, prior to the Coopers taking off once more. Although the sequence was filmed and edited together, it was agreed to be removed from the film because it diminished the feeling of suspense from the chase, but not everyone agreed with its removal. Second unit director Philip Ressler disagreed and thought it was a magical piece of filming that slowed the pace down only to enhance the rapid pace of the remaining chase. Ressler convinced Dealey to keep the scene in, and the final cut of The Italian Job actually included it. But it would be removed later by editor John Trumper and producer Michael Dealey after the head of production, Robert Evans, thought it to be too indulgent. The soundtrack was composed and arranged by the legendary Quincy Jones. The lyrics to On Days Like These were sung by Matt Monro and written by Don Black. Black also wrote Get a Bloomin' Move On, the actual title for what many people call the Self-Preservation Society, and this song was performed by members of the cast, including Michael Caine. The Italian Job premiered in London on the 5th of June 1969. It didn't get overwhelmingly brilliant reviews, but it did end up becoming the 14th most popular film of 1969 at the UK box office, mostly thanks to its high-profile British cast, including Caine, Coward and Benny Hill, who was one of Britain's biggest comedians at the time. While it flopped in the US, its marketing was cited as being to blame, because the US and some European posters feature a hard-looking Michael Caine in a 30s-style mobster outfit with a machine gun in one hand and a cup of tea in the other, flanked by a half-naked girl with a plan of Turin on her back. There wasn't a Mini Cooper in sight, nor a mention of Michael Caine starring in the movie, except in the small print at the bottom. The movie would, however, receive a Golden Globe nomination for Best English Language Foreign Film. Paramount would claim that this $3 million movie ended up $9 million in debt somehow. And yet, in 1999 it was re-released for its 30th anniversary, and its status as a full-blown cult and British classic was achieved. Paramount released a new poster for that anniversary emphasising the Cool Britannia theme that permeated the 1990s, and it prominently featured both Michael Caine and the Minis. It ranked number 36 on the BFI Top 100 British Films by the British Film Institute. In November 2004, Total Film named The Italian Job the 27th greatest British film of all time. In 2011, it was voted the best British film in a poll of film fans conducted by Sky Movies. The line "You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off" by Caine was voted favourite film one-liner in a 2003 poll of 1,000 film fans, and it currently holds a rating of 81% on Rotten Tomatoes. But that's not all. The Italian Job has been paid homage to at the 2012 London Olympics, had multiple talks of a TV series, has had a video game by Rockstar, the same people who developed Grand Theft Auto, and it is in a very similar vein to Grand Theft Auto. It's been parodied in other films and TV series, as well as lovingly paid homage to in other films and TV series. Peter Collinson, who died in 1980, aged just 44, would never know the cult status that The Italian Job would achieve, and this year it celebrates its 55th anniversary. There's also been 2 remakes, a Bollywood remake in 2012 called Players, and the Hollywood remake. So strap in, because we're going to be going to Los Angeles for The Italian Job 2003. This shows a character watching The Italian Job, while having characters named after the characters from The Italian Job, and referencing The Italian Job as the inspiration for their own heist that's remarkably similar to The Italian Job's Italian Job, without being an Italian job that's actually set in an Italian city. Here's the trailer for The Italian Job 2003.
Daddy, come by, we'll have some breakfast.
It'll be a long trip. I'm in Venice.
Learn the language of poetry, art, romance, sex.
Unlike you, my friend, I don't need a guidebook.
The plan was flawless.
The next 45 minutes, we own this place, gentlemen.
Okay, Steve, it's right above you.
The heist was perfect. The escape was clean.
What are you gonna do with your share?
I'm gonna get a NAD T77 with the 70-watt amps and Burr Brown VACs. It's a big stereo. Speakers so loud they blow women's clothes off.
The only threat was the one they never saw coming.
What the hell are you doing? I made a few plans of my own.
There's nowhere you can go where we won't find you.
That's probably right, John.
Found him, Stella. It's in Los Angeles.
Stealing that gold is not gonna bring my father back.
It's not about the gold. John was like a father to me, too. And I just can't move on, so I've set things right.
They're not in it for the pay.
Hey, Steve.
Gang's all here.
You have no idea how hard it is for me not to reach across this table and kill you.
You want to start the game up again? That's fine with me.
They're in it for the payback.
Come on! You'll try to take out my guards. I have 5 of them that you don't know about.
I don't do dogs. I had a real bad experience.
What happened?
I had a bad experience.
You'll try to hack the system.
You ready to create the biggest traffic jam in the history of Los Angeles?
I'm so ready.
Oops.
You gonna try to crack my safe?
You took my father from me. I'm taking this.
You just blew the best thing you had going for you. You just blew the element of surprise.
Surprised?
Why do you get to punch him and I don't?
Paramount Pictures presents
The gold is coming to us. Gridlock every route except for the one we choose. Force that truck to go exactly where we want it to go.
Stop them before they hit the street.
This is it, guys. Moment of truth.
We made our play, and I came out on top.
It's over when I say it's over.
5 seconds of paint on the train.
Mark Wahlberg, Charlize Theron, Edward Norton, Seth Green, Jason Statham, Mos Def, and Donald Sutherland.
You're out of moves. The game is over. Just give up already.
You've got no imagination.
What happened to my truck?
Got the Holy Spirit.
The The Italian Job.
You know this was never about the gold.
Whatever helps you sleep at night, sweetheart.
A highly skilled team is assembled for one last heist to steal $35 million in gold bars from a heavily guarded safe in Venice, Italy. After successfully pulling off the heist, one of the team, driven by greed and jealousy, arranges to take the gold for himself and leaves the remaining members of the group for dead, returning to Los Angeles with the gold. Charlie Croker and his team want to exact revenge against the traitor after he killed their leader and mentor, John Bridger. Charlie enlists the help of John's daughter Stella, a professional safecracker, to execute a daring heist that weaves through the freeways and subways of LA. Let's run through the cast of this Italian Job. We have Mark Wahlberg as Charlie Croker, Charlize Theron as Stella Bridger, Edward Norton as Steve Frizzelli, Donald Sutherland as John Bridger, Jason Statham as Handsome Rob, Seth Green as Lyle, and Mos Def as Left Ear. The Italian Job 2003 has a screenplay by Donna Powers and Wayne Powers, is directed by F. Gary Gray, and based on The Italian Job by Troy Kennedy Martin. The late 90s/early 2000s reinvention of classic heist movies was a thing. In 1999, John McTiernan gave us the remake of The Thomas Crown Affair, starring Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo, a more erotic, but some might say less involving film than its 1968 predecessor. In 2001, Steven Soderbergh's wildly successful update of Ocean's 11, originally starring Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack in 1960, wowed audiences with its high-profile cast and elaborate set pieces, and several of its own sequels. Paramount distributed The Italian Job in 1969, and in the following decades it was revered as an iconic British heist film, often quoted and lovingly homaged. A remake, therefore, was high on Paramount CEO Sherry Lansing and producer Donald DeLine's list of priorities. This is despite that supposed $9 million loss. Obviously, they forgot about that. They must have written it off. Lansing and DeLine commissioned a draft script written by Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, a faithful modern remake that took place in, unsurprisingly, Italy. Their script was rejected, and the studio hired Donna Powers and Wayne Powers. The Powers liked the idea of a traffic jam, gold bars, Mini Coopers, and no guns from the original, and wrote a completely new screenplay around those ideas. But neither had ever seen the original and only viewed it to get a sense of the plot and tone. Over the course of 2 years, they wrote 18 drafts and developed The Italian Job as more inspired by the original than a shot-for-shot contemporary remake of the original. The main similarities obviously being the gold bullion heist and a red, blue and white trio of Mini Coopers. Gone were the original Mark I Mini Coopers of the 1969 movie. In their place, 3 BMW Mini Coopers. BMW having acquired the brand in 2000, British Motor Corporation became British Leyland in 1968, and in the 1980s, British Leyland, including the Mini brand, as well as Rover, were acquired by British Aerospace. In 1994, the Rover Group was acquired by BMW before being broken up, but BMW retained the Mini brand, and BMW started developing their modern successor to the Mini in 1995. Bear in mind, the original Mini was still in production at this time, and they were still selling the original Mini up until the year 2000. These are now referred to as classic Minis. BMW's Mini launched in 2001, and 32 of these Mark I BMW Minis were used during production. They were custom built. The blue and white Minis were Mini Coopers, and the red Mini was a Cooper S. And I am going to come back to the cars, and specifically the stunts, a bit later. I know it's sacrilegious, but I have always wanted a BMW Mini. It's always been the number one car that's been on my list to buy for my next car, so it is probably the car that I am going to buy next. And as I'm going to come to, this movie might have pioneered the electric Minis that we now see out and about. Sort of. A few years earlier, director F. Gary Gray had directed The Negotiator with Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey, which wasn't a huge financial hit, but was fairly well received by critics. Earlier in 2003, his film A Man Apart was released, and when he was sent the script for The Italian Job, he was excited for the project, not just because of its pedigree, but also the cast that he could put together. Sheila Jaffe, the casting director, had cast The Sopranos, and so she knew a thing or two about putting together an outstanding cast. Gray had Mark Wahlberg in mind for Charlie Croker from the outset and thought the role was perfect for him. Wahlberg had impressed him in Boogie Nights and the two had become friends. They were looking for the ideal project to work on together, so Gray sent him the script and Wahlberg was immediately on board. For the role of Stella, Gray didn't just want a standard Hollywood model/actress. He wanted someone who could credibly be a safecracker, but also accessible. He immediately wanted Charlize Theron, who was his first and only choice. Theron, who was up and coming at the time and was also in pre-production on Monster, which also came out in 2003. She would obviously go on to win the Academy Award for Best Actress for that role, and that was when her career kind of went stratospheric. But all of that happened at about the same time that she was offered the role for The Italian Job. Jaffe would also recommend Jason Statham as Handsome Rob. Edward Norton wasn't particularly keen to star in the movie though. He agreed to do it purely to avoid being sued by Paramount. It was an 100% contractual obligation. He started working with the studio in 1995 on Primal Fear, which was his screen debut, and he won a Golden Globe for that movie and received an Oscar nomination. He was contractually obligated to make a further 2 movies for Paramount. He continued to make movies for other studios, including being nominated for a second Oscar for American History X with New Line, but all the while his contract with Paramount was still ticking by, and there was no agreement on a collaboration with Paramount. After a Paramount project conflicted with a role he desperately wanted, that of the movie Fight Club, he and his agent agreed to extend the terms of his Paramount agreement, which was 1 future movie and a paycheck of $1 million, but he had to do it within 18 months of Fight Club wrapping production, and it had to be agreeable to both parties. If they couldn't agree, Paramount would have a further 24 months to assign Norton a project of their choosing. This would lead to years of haggling between Norton and Paramount CEO Sherry Lansing, and they went back and forth on several options. And then Paramount offered him The Italian Job in the spring of 2002 and informed him he didn't actually have a choice in the matter. And rather than get involved in lengthy legal proceedings, Norton acquiesced and agreed to star in The Italian Job to fulfill his contract with Paramount. At the first rehearsal, Gray told the entire cast to drop their scripts and that they were going to pull off a heist. And they really did. They put together a plan to steal some things and really ended up breaking and entering somewhere. Gray has never divulged where it was, stealing a couple of things and escaping without being caught. Gray's assistant would then return all the stolen goods and the team celebrated with drinks after their successful heist, and obviously no charges were ever brought, but it established a bond between the cast, and rather than memorise words on a page, they learned to work together and build that core relationship. And apparently many of the cast are still friends to this day. Gray also encouraged improv on the set, especially when it came to Seth Green. The mimicking of Jason Statham chatting up girls is completely improvised and is one of the most memorable scenes in the film. Gray and cinematographer Wally Pfister used The French Connection, Ronin and The Bourne Identity as visual references for the look of the movie, with dark textures, strong contrast and undertones, using the Super 35 format since Paramount preferred that the film not be shot in the anamorphic format, despite Pfister's wishes to do so. However, Gray still wanted a widescreen aspect ratio, just like the original, so they chose to shoot the film in Super 35 for a 2.39:1 aspect ratio. Wahlberg, Theron and Statham attended special drivers' training sessions at Willow Springs International Motorsports Park for nearly a month during pre-production. For Theron, that was originally extended to 6 weeks longer than her male co-stars. While it was notably insulting for the only woman on the cast to get 6 weeks more training, Theron would step up to the challenge. While the movie is more of a reimagining than a remake, F. Gary Gray didn't want to go down the CG route. Emulating the original, nearly all of the stunts in the movie are real, shot on location, with the actors doing most of their own driving. And everyone agreed that Charlize Theron was the best driver on the cast. The first Mini to appear in the movie is a 1997 Mark VII Mini Cooper, driven by Theron. The car is reminiscent of, and an homage to, one of the cars in the original Italian Job. Interestingly, it's Charlize Theron's character who drives the first new Mini in the movie too, and it's a great introduction as she does a reverse 180 turn in a cramped warehouse. Mark Wahlberg's experiences were less victorious, as he admitted that after the first 10 minutes of driving the intensely powered go-kart, which he cited as being incredibly fun, he did throw up in it. He also didn't fare too well in the passenger seat either. The filmmakers actually had to get rid of a scene where he was sitting next to Charlize Theron, as he kept getting sick from all the sudden movements. Theron outdrove everyone and made a point to do it too, highlighting the sexist idea that a woman might need more driving training than a man. So let's go through some of these stunts. The boat chase in Venice is real. The Minis in the subway is real, and I'm going to come back to it. The Minis on Hollywood Boulevard, real. The helicopter flying under the overpass, not only was it real, it's the first time it's ever been done. Hundreds of cars were used to simulate traffic jams, and this was filmed at the intersection of Hollywood Boulevard and Highland Avenue, a well-known tourist area with more than 70 shops and 25 restaurants. Shops remained open, tourists walked the pavements, but this caused a bit of a logistical issue while filming in LA. For a scene with 1,000 extras, hundreds of cars and helicopters, Gray shut down a city block of Los Angeles, which included shutting down 100 shops. It was a logistical challenge and was carefully and meticulously planned for weeks. Gray would cite it as the hardest scene he's ever had to direct. Consistency in movies is a real challenge. So Gray created a mission statement that he distributed to everyone on the project, and it outlined everything from what he wanted the audience to feel about the characters, the colours, the sounds, the emotions, as it all related to the scene and the action. This document was referred to constantly to maintain consistency between all of the units. The created mission statement also reduced the amount of sequences that needed visual effects, which highlights the visceral action in the film. Visual effects wouldn't feel consistent, so Gray put the challenge to his stunt coordinator Kurt Bryant to plan stunts so they could do them practically. A Mini did get flipped over, the stuntman was fine, but emulating the original's practical stunts was important, as well as ensuring the stunts were similarly awe-inspiring. The other place it was shot on location was, unsurprisingly for the Italian Job, Italy, except this time Venice, where a complicated canal chase was filmed, which was under the strict supervision of Venetian officials due to the high speeds of the boats. Not everything was shot on location though. The Venice building where the film's opening heist sequence takes place, the van from which the thieves survey Steve Frizzelli's mansion, the hotel room, and the Red Line subway tunnel were sets constructed at Downey Studios in California. But as I mentioned, they really did drive Minis through the subway. But you can't drive a petrol-powered car through the subway. And because electric Minis didn't exist, they had to make them themselves. John Carpenter, the transportation coordinator, engineered and built a trio of electric Minis. At the time, they were the only electric Minis that existed on planet Earth. And soon, one of them will be on my drive. Probably. The Italian Job released on the 30th of May 2003 after premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival on the 11th of May 2003. It opened third at the US box office behind Finding Nemo and Bruce Almighty, and on its $60 million budget, earned a respectable $176 million worldwide. This version of the Italian Job would do considerably better in the US, where it earned $106 million domestically. It also received good critical reviews and sits at 72% on Rotten Tomatoes, and sales of BMW's Mini increased 22% in 2003 thanks to the feature-length car commercial directed by F. Gary Gray and starring Mark Wahlberg and Charlize Theron. It was successful enough that Paramount started developing a sequel, The Brazilian Job, which was due to start filming in March 2005, with most of the original cast, without Edward Norton for obvious reasons, but faced multiple delays. It was based on an original script called The Wrecking Crew, which was reworked into a new heist by the team in Brazil. It kept getting delayed, management of Paramount changed, and the cast and crew were doing other things. It was last reported to be being made in 2010, but that was 14 years ago, and unless you're Richard Linklater, it doesn't take 14 years to make a movie. The original 1969 Italian Job feels like one of those time capsule movies of a very specific time and place. 1960s Britain and the culture permeating Britain at the time. In fact, it's so quintessentially British that it's no wonder Americans just didn't get it. Michael Caine really is the epitome of cool. He has an effortless screen persona, and it's no wonder that men wanted to be him. You forget how little women feature in the movie just because of how charismatic Caine is. As a woman viewing this movie for the first time in 2024, don't come at me, I'm struck by how little I care about the things I usually would, because everything else just blew me away. The speed and detail of the car chases, the stunts, in fact, anything to do with any vehicle just had me on the edge of my seat. To achieve that level of practical stunt work in 1969 is phenomenal. That's kind of what I take away from this movie, the awesome stunt work, more than the fact it's a product of its time with regards to British attitudes in the 60s. It is terrific fun. The remake, though, is not without its charms. It might not have a screen persona to match Michael Caine, because Donald Sutherland just isn't on screen enough, but it does have Charlize Theron, and honestly, it would be a much lesser movie without her nuanced take on a fairly flat, one-dimensional female character. And I'm so glad this movie eschewed the CG car chases and Fast and Furious style zany action for something altogether more grounded. The car chases aren't quite as frenetic and impressive, but the fact a helicopter blade sliced a Mini for real is impressive. The stunts feel tangible and real, and I kind of love it for that. Edward Norton might not have wanted to be there, and that does show, but everyone else seems to be having a good time. It's not the Italian Job, but it's not the Italian Job. There's not a single quotable line or piece of music or action set piece, but it does stand on its own merit. It's just one of those loose remakes that probably wouldn't have got the traction, excuse the car pun, that it had without the Italian Job name. There's long been speculation of a reboot of the Italian Job as a Paramount Plus TV show, but sometimes remakes are made for the sake of nostalgia and other times just as a cash grab. It's highly probable that if the original had been a huge hit in the US, then the feelings around a remake might have been different. As it stands, the original is held in such high favour, possibly more so than any other movie featured in this season so far, that the remake was damned if it did or it didn't. But as two separate entities, two movies that have a very similar theme but very different things going on, they actually work fairly well to complement each other. And I'm really glad they didn't have Mark Wahlberg say you're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off in a Boston accent, because I can't do accents, but I don't think that works. Anyone who can do a Boston accent or who is from the Boston area, try and do that line and see if it works, because I don't think it will. Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Italian Job 1969 and the Italian Job 2003. And thank you for your continued support of this podcast. If you do want to take a moment and help this podcast grow, then you could leave a rating or review wherever you found this podcast. You could tell your friends and family, or you can find me at Verbal Diorama on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And basically find my stuff, like my stuff, repost my stuff. That would be awesome, and that would help other people to also find my stuff. Usually at this point, I would recommend other episodes. However, I have never done another heist movie before, so I don't feel like I can recommend any other episodes. But there's loads of episodes of this podcast. Listen to any one of them. None of them are going to be similar to the Italian Job, but maybe in the future, maybe I should do like the Thomas Crown Affair or Ocean's 11 or something like that, so I could get a kind of heisty link going on. It's always good to try new genres on your podcast. Next episode, could it be? Yes, it could. Something's coming, something good. For the final episode of Remake, a musical from 1961, the highest grossing movie of that year, winning 10 Oscars from 11 nominations, was remade in 2021, directed by Steven Spielberg, with 7 Oscar nominations of its own and a win for the sublime Ariana DeBose. I am finishing this month with West Side Story. So please join me next week for West Side Story 1961 and West Side Story 2021. I'm very excited to be talking about West Side Story. I am a huge fan of musicals. This was a musical that I grew up with. So join me next week for that. This podcast is free and it always will be free. However, if you have the means to do so and you enjoy what I do and you get value out of what I do, you can sign up to support the show in one of two ways, really. You could give a one-off tip at verbaldiorama.com/tips, or you can subscribe to the Patreon at verbaldiorama.com/Patreon, and you can join the amazing patrons who keep this podcast going, quite literally, with subscriptions and equipment and all sorts of things. I would not be able to do this show without them. They are Simon E, Sade, Claudia, Simon B, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas, Zoe, Kev, Pete, Heather, Danny, Ali, Stu, Brett, Philip, Michelle, Zenos, Sean, Rhino, and Russell. And thank you to Ben for the inspiration for this episode too. If you want to get in touch with me, you can. You can email verbaldiorama@gmail.com, or you can see my website, verbaldiorama.com, and you can fill out the little contact form. You can find out bits and pieces about me, and you can find every single episode of this podcast on there too. And you can also find my work at filmstories.co.uk. And finally...
Where are you going?
A work shirt and a service truck.
Are you kidding me? How does he do that? How do you do that? What are you saying? Hey, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good.
Nice to meet you. I'm Handsome Rob. And you,
Oh, my name's Becky, but it's written on my shirt.
Listen, I'm gonna need your shirt and your truck.
Perfect. I'll give them both to you. Would you like my virginity as well?
If it's on the menu.
Oh, you're so witty. Why don't you take advantage of me?
Yeah, you're not too bright, are you?
No.
Perfect.
Bye.
Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and updates. Movies you know, movies you don't.